Every club. Every day. The Global Sports Podcast Network.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Daily Fulham Podcast. My name is Gavin Ruffle, and the weekend starts right here. No Premier League action as the FA Cup takes centre stage, and I will be giving a brief preview of Fulham's trip to Wigan Athletic in the fourth round. But I'm going to start with transfers, seeing as the window has recently slammed shut. And it was a very quiet transfer window for Fulham, wasn't it? Bringing in just the one player into their first team setup, and even that was completed outside of the window. Given the fact that Willian is a free agent, Willian has returned to Fulham after 6 months away. He's made his return after not such a glorious little spell in Olympiacos, where his contract was terminated at the end of last year. Since then, he's been training with Fulham for the last few weeks. And given the situation, given the problems they have in that area with the injury to Harry Wilson, Marco Silva has expressed his desires to bring in someone to fill that void. And he's got his man. Willian has returned to the club. It was announced on Thursday morning, a short-term deal until the end of the season. What can he bring? Well, he brings experience, doesn't he? He's 36 years old. He knows the Premier League. He knows the players. It was great to see the video Fulham put out on the socials of him being welcomed back, and he's obviously got a good relationship with all the players there. He's a very popular figure, and he brings a lot of knowledge with him, doesn't he? Which will go a long way to helping some of the younger players. Can he still perform a role for Fulham? Well, I guess only time will tell. I remember when he signed last time, there was a lot of scepticism about it, a lot of doubt about what he could contribute for Fulham, maybe given his spell at Arsenal, which didn't quite go according to plan. But in the 2 seasons he had at Fulham, I think I speak for everybody in saying it was very successful, and his legs hadn't gone. Now he is a couple of years older. Have his legs gone? Marco Silva in his press conferences in the build-up to this game has said he's not quite up to fitness yet. He'll need to be in better shape than he is now in order to get his way into that Fulham team. But there's no doubt that he will add something for Fulham, his experience, and he's a class player, isn't he? I think he's been an underrated player. I think Tom Kearney was on the Monday Night Football a few weeks ago and he expressed how Willian is probably the best player he's played with, and I think certainly during his time at Chelsea he was an important member of that team. Probably went under the radar a little bit with the likes of Eden Hazard maybe taking much of the glory, much of the limelight, but he's been a fantastic player. He clearly loves the area, and he clearly loves Westland. We saw him, didn't we, on Monday night going to Stamford Bridge, and I saw some Fulham fans were up in arms about that, which I don't know why. He's a bit puzzling me. Man lives life outside of job. He's fully entitled to go to whatever game he wants to, so no problem with that. But it is a short-term basis until the end of the season. I feel like it's a low-risk move. Of course, Fulham fans would have wanted to see their team do a bit more business. They were linked with certain players. We know they were in the market in the hunt for a right-back, given the injury to Kenny Tete, but nothing quite came about there. There was talk, wasn't there, on deadline day about Samuel Chukwueze possibly moving. Got everyone excited, didn't it? Another Nigerian possibly linking up at Fulham to join Iwobi and Calvin Bassey. There's conflicting reports, but what we gather is that Fulham were looking at a loan there with a potential to buy, but the deal fell through due to time constraints. And that's the danger, isn't it, of trying to do deals so late on in the transfer window, that if things go awry, then there's no plan B after that, is there? But with registered interest in the player, that you wonder if that is something that Fulham might look at again in the summer. I suppose it's dependent on how the rest of the season goes for Chukwueze with AC Milan. The better he does, the more unlikely it is for Fulham to go in for him again, or he might be priced out of a move for Fulham. So for Fulham fans, if you do want Chukwueze to move in the summer, then you probably hope he stays on the bench at AC Milan. But he's no doubt a talented player, very young, exciting player. Maybe hasn't had the best time of it this season, but he's a player that, with the rumours emerging on deadline, they got everyone excited, but only for it to fall through. As is often the case, as I said, if you try and do things last minute, then that's always likely to be the case. No right-backs brought in, despite Silva expressing that they were certainly on the lookout to strengthen in that position. Again, talk of certain players, Bright Osei Samuel from Fenerbahce. If you follow Fulham in the transfer window in recent times, his name seems to pop up every time. There was talk about Fulham and Fenerbahce agreeing the deal, but that was blocked by Jose Mourinho. And Vladimir Coufal was another player who, of course, was involved in league action on deadline day as West Ham played Chelsea. There was talk of him possibly going to Fulham late on, but nothing materialised there. I think for Timothy Castagne now, that position is his now. He's been under a little bit of pressure recently with performances, but I think that was a big second half for him against Newcastle. Much improved from the first half where he was given a bit of a run around by Anthony Gordon. So hopefully that second half performance can give him a bit of confidence, knowing now that he's got a run in the team with Kenny Tete out injured, that we can see that player that we saw last season, which was keeping Kenny Tete out of the side. Yeah, I was a little bit surprised that Fulham didn't bring anyone else in, especially on a short-term loan. They only have one loan player at the club, being Reece Nelson. So yeah, there wasn't much movement. They weren't the only club that were quiet during this window. Certainly affecting the first team squad, there wasn't much movement. Bits and pieces here regarding the under-21s. There was talk of Goddo possibly going out on loan to Watford, but he ended up staying put, and that's probably due to the problems Fulham have in that position, which I might elaborate a little bit further on as we go into the preview for the Wigan encounter. But all in all, it was a very quiet January. Transfer spending in the Premier League, 370 million, but about half of that was Manchester City. So for clubs across the board, there wasn't much going on throughout the month. More on the transfer window to come, but before then, let me tell you a little bit about our sponsors. Here at the Global Sports Podcast Network, we spent a lot of time selecting our delivery platform. Zencastr came out the clear winner. With 4K video recording from your phone and AI editing that automatically removes all those ums and ahs, it's super easy to start a podcast that sounds great and is delivered efficiently. If you're ready to tell your story, check out the link in the show description to learn more about Zencastr. I talked about it there, didn't I? That it was a quiet month for the majority of the clubs. Fulham only bringing in the one player, and that was outside of the window. And there were certain clubs that didn't bring any players in at all. And it doesn't seem to generate that same buzz, that same excitement, does it? The deadline day, they can talk it up, hype it up on Sky Sports News. I remember back in the day, it was a really exciting day to follow all the ingoings and outgoings. There seemed to be a lot more going on, and always used to just have it on Sky Sports News throughout the day for deadline day and constantly be scrolling through Twitter, but it just seems like it's a non-event these days, and there's various reasons why that might be the case. I think PSR has had a big impact. We've seen the ramifications of PSR and the threat of points deductions. Well, we've already seen that enforced on certain clubs. Nottingham Forest, obviously their aggressive spending in the past couple of seasons leading to a points deduction last season ultimately didn't have much of an effect as they stayed up, and they're doing well this season, and they weren't active in the transfer window, were they? So I think PSR has been a major reason why we're not seeing certain clubs do business. I do think as a business model you should look to do the majority of your transfers across the summer. I think that's the way to go about things, because any business you do in January, it should just be for emergencies, in my honest opinion, or if someone's out for the rest of the season, then to fill a gap. I feel like a lot of panic spending is done in January, especially teams down the bottom. They recognise the need, the want to stay in the Premier League and how big it is for your club to survive, that leads them to bring in a lot of players. And we saw Ipswich were one of the busier clubs in the window as they look to keep hold of their top flight status, and the majority of the business done was by clubs probably not enjoying the seasons they would like. And obviously what's gone on in the first half of the season, it's kind of led to that need, that extra desire to bring in players to make up for lost time or to make up for what's gone on before. And Manchester City, again, they won't be happy with the season they're having. They're a long way off the pace, and I think what you've seen there, the fact that they are the biggest spenders in the transfer window, it's a rebuild job for Pep, isn't it? It's an indication that his squad, the success they've enjoyed over the last few years, it's almost run its course now. It's come to an end, and they've invested a lot in the squad, but on unproven younger players that you'll see be a part of that squad for the years to come, even if they're not necessarily going to make an immediate impact straight away. They're what you call players for the long term. Aston Villa were another club that were busy-ish towards the end of deadline day. Some higher profile signings, the likes of Marcus Rashford, who needed a move. He needed to get out of Manchester United, didn't he? And Marco Asensio, who is a player with great repute, having played for big clubs like Real Madrid and PSG. And they're probably just a little bit off the pace in the league. They're going well in the Champions League, but if they want to get back there, then they're going to have to go on a run. So the need for them to bring in signings was much greater than some of the other clubs. You look at the clubs that are enjoying successful seasons: Liverpool, Nottingham Forest, Newcastle, again, some of this is to do with PSR, but another factor is that maybe they don't need the extra players, and sometimes bringing in players is just the way to appease fans. You feel like you have to make signings because there's such a will from the fan base for you to do so. And it's always said, isn't it, how January can be a tough month to do business in. And again, there's factors that contribute to that, isn't there? Because some of the players that there's major clamour for, well, their clubs are just unwilling to let them go mid-season, are they? And that's why you're often priced out of players. Players' value suddenly becomes greater than what it ordinarily would be, what it would be in the summer. And a Champions League club isn't going to sell to another Champions League club, or a Champions League club isn't going to buy for another Champions League club, because that player would then be cup tied for the knockout stages of that competition. So from a transfer side of things, there wasn't much to speak about, was there? There was no Van Dijk signing, or it's not what we saw in the past, Robinho going to City on deadline day, Berbatov going to Manchester United on deadline day. It doesn't generate that same buzz, that same excitement for the fan on the sofa who just wants to sit in front of the TV and watch deadline day unfold. There's no Peter Odemwingie rocking up outside Loftus Road. Those days seem to have gone. Very quiet month all in all. Not much has happened. And just throwing things back to Fulham, I think for Fulham, yes, in an ideal world, you probably would have wanted another winger, or you would have wanted the Chukwueze signing, because again it comes down to appeasing fans, and there's a player maybe that has a long-term future at the club rather than signing a player on a short-term basis that can do a job until the end of the season, and the desire probably to bring a right back in just because of the injuries that's occurred in that position. But I said it at the start of January, and I'm saying it at the start of February now, there was no real need to tinker. The need only became greater because of injuries to certain players who you hope will be back before the end of the season anyway. So from a Fulham perspective, I don't think there's any need to worry, and I've seen people talking about lack of ambition. I don't see it like that at all. Across the board, across the 20 Premier League clubs, there's no club other than Manchester City that's gone out there and spent a great deal of money, and in Manchester City's case, that's for the long-term future, not for the near future to rectify their season. So for me, January transfers can always involve panic signing and just to appease the fans, for the sake of bringing in new players when it isn't necessarily needed. So just got to get on with it now. The squad's assembled for the rest of the season. We know who's there. Obviously, start of the transfer window, there was a lot of talk concerning Andres Pereira and his situation, whether he would go back to Brazil. But Marco Silva kept talking about his want for the player to stay at the club. He still thinks he's got a big role to play. So any outside noise now, you just put that on the back burner. Players should focus on his football. Fans, as tough as it is, get behind the player and get behind all the players. The squad is what it is, and they can still enjoy a successful end to the season, can't they? Especially if they can come through Saturday's clash against Wigan and progress to the next round of the FA Cup, which I'll be looking at in a little bit greater detail in the next part. But before I do that, let me just point you all in the direction of GSPN. The Global Sports Podcast Network is changing the face of football podcasts. With dedicated daily content for every Premier League team, women's football, fantasy football, and a daily Premier League wrap-up broadcast in 5 different languages, it's your one-stop shop for your daily football fix. Find GSPN wherever you find your usual podcasts. On to the weekend's game now, and I feel there is an extra importance on this fixture now, given Fulham's position in the league, 9th in the league table, but I feel like European aspirations are probably unlikely now, just given the nature of the season, how Fulham have not necessarily been able to string a run of consecutive wins together, go on a streak that can catapult them up in the league. So as far as Europe is concerned, you would say their best chance of getting there is via the FA Cup, and there's no reason why Fulham can't progress a long way in the competition if they take it seriously enough, if they don't overlook their opponents on the weekend. It would have been some disappointment last season going out at this stage of competition, losing at home to Newcastle, and this came off the back of the League Cup semi-final defeat to Liverpool. So disappointing few days for Fulham there, and their season kind of petered out after that, didn't they? So if you're still in the FA Cup, then you're still fighting for something, and it still gives you that boost, that energising boost that you need going into the end of the season, rather than ticking the games off and not necessarily being involved in anything. I feel like for Fulham now, they can absolutely target this competition, and given a good draw, not to say that they've won this game, if they can take care of business in this game, then they could perhaps go a long way, get back to Wembley if all things go well. It's actually their first visit to the Brick Community Stadium. Can't believe it's called that now, by the way. It'll always be the DW Stadium, or JJB Stadium as far as I'm concerned. And if I've lost anyone under the age of 25, just ask your dad about JJB Sports. But it's Fulham's first visit to Wigan's ground since July 2020. And yeah, you heard that correctly, July 2020, because that was the COVID season. So fixtures were still taking place at that stage. And it was only a few weeks later that Fulham had that great day at Wembley, beating Brentford in the playoff final. Fulham actually have a terrific record in recent time against Wigan, stemming back to 2007. They're actually unbeaten in the last 19 meetings. Many of those being in the Premier League, but they are poles apart, the two sides, right at this moment in time. Fulham 9th in the Premier League. Wigan, contrastingly, 16th in League One. They are in similar positions in the fact that they are secure in the league, but maybe too far off pursuing anything more significant, so they can throw all their eggs in the one basket in the FA Cup, and hopefully they can both put out strong sides, give themselves the best chance of progressing to the next round. It's another encounter for Marco Silva against one of his former charges in Sean Maloney. He must be starting to feel a bit old now, because this is actually the second time in the FA Cup after the third round meeting against Watford, when he come up against Tom Cleverley, of course he managed at Watford, and now in Sean Maloney he's coming up against a player who he managed during his first venture in England when he took charge of Hull in the Premier League. Sean Maloney, of course, has got great FA Cup pedigree. He was the one who took the corner for Ben Watson's headed goal in 2013 when they pulled off that great upset in the final, beating Manchester City. And you'd have to say, looking back, that's one of the big FA Cup shocks, isn't it? You probably put that on a similar level with Wimbledon beating Liverpool way back when. But it was a bittersweet season for Wigan, wasn't it, as they got relegated. What's probably forgotten is the year after they won the FA Cup, they got all the way to the semi-finals again at Wembley and only lost out to Arsenal in a penalty shootout. Sean Maloney was involved again there, but he was an unused sub. So they do have good pedigree in the competition in recent years, certainly better pedigree than Fulham, you would say. Then there are connections between the two clubs. We'll see players coming up against former sides here, and there may be a rare opportunity to see twins come up against each other. We were denied the prospect of seeing father against son in the last round when Everton played Peterborough. Ashley Young not playing against his son Tyler, who was an unused sub as Peterborough were trying to get back in the game, so he didn't see any action. But there's a rare chance here we might see twins come up against each other. Stephen, of course, coming through the ranks as a young boy along with Ryan. So how unique would that be for those two to possibly come up against each other at some point in the game, and be a proud moment, I'm sure, for all the Sessegnon family. But there's other links as well. Anthony Robinson, one of the best fullbacks, one of the best left-backs in the Premier League this season. He's coming up against the former side, isn't he, as well? Spent 2 seasons at Wigan Athletic. And the final Fulham player that has links with Wigan is Marshall Goddo. Goddo, if things had worked out differently, he might have got that move to the Championship on loan, but he's remained at Craven Cottage. He enjoyed the very successful loan spell at Wigan last season. So there does appear to be a good relationship between the two clubs. What team will we see Fulham put out? Well, Marco Silva, he always talks about and expresses the importance of the cup competitions and recognises what it means to fans. But then he does that and he normally makes 10, 11 changes. Well, in the last round we saw it was a bit of a mix, wasn't it? We saw some players get given minutes, get given opportunity to make a rare start. But he also was respectful enough to the opposition that he did play a lot of his first team players. And I'm sure he will see a mix again. I hope it's not 11 changes because, as I've mentioned, I feel like this is an important game for Fulham. If they do get knocked out here against lower league opposition, it could really have a detrimental effect to the end of the season. I never buy into the fact that when you go on a cup run, people see it as a distraction. Because if Fulham success in the FA Cup is reaching a semi-final or final, then does it really matter if they finish 11th, 12th, 13th or whatever? Does it make much of a difference finishing 1 or 2 places higher in the league? And if you were to get knocked out on the weekend, I don't think it makes up for that. So hopefully he puts out a strong enough team, and as long as they show the right attitude and application, along with the commitment needed in this game, then hopefully their quality will prevail and see them come out winners. But no doubt in mind, progression is very important here on the weekend, as it generates a good feeling. It generates a buzz and feeling of confidence, and I think that's what you need to look at. Not that the FA Cup isn't a distraction. The fact that winning breeds confidence. If you can win your FA Cup side, then take that into the next game, and hopefully you can go on a run. As far as some of the team news, well, will Willian play? Probably not, judging what he said about the player in his press conference, that he needs to be in better shape. I think that was pretty damning there, what he said about the player, and it's understandable, isn't it? I mean, he left Olympiacos after not having a great spell there, despite training for the last few weeks with Fulham. He's obviously not going to be match fit, so will we see him in the squad? Possibly. Do I expect him to start? Absolutely not. And there's one other key bit of team news that emerged from that press conference, and it's the news about Reiss Nelson. Reiss Nelson, it seemed like he was nearing a return to action. The Newcastle game came a bit too quickly for him, not in contention for that, but there was every sign that he might be involved. Beyond that, unfortunately, some bad news has come out. He's suffered a setback in recovery, not from the existing injury. He's picked up a new injury, which looks like he's going to keep him on the sidelines for a long period of time. I'm not quite sure when this news emerged, but with the knowledge of his injury now and Harry Wilson's injury, maybe there was that extra need to bring in another winger, and ultimately that's probably why Marshall Goddo has stayed at the club, hasn't it? Because they are short in that position. Harry Wilson, he's undergone surgery, and it looks like he's not back until April at the very earliest. So yeah, just going back to Reiss Nelson, it's a real shame for the player there. He was making an impact, wasn't he, before he suffered that injury, going to Fulham, getting some game time, and I think he was becoming a real fan's favourite and linking up well with some of the other Arsenal players in the squad. So that's a bitter blow for the player. You really feel for him now, and you just want to kind of put an arm around the player at this moment in time and just give him the support he needs, because the injury is a setback, but mentally, psychologically, it must be a blow for him as well. Other than that, there seems to be a fresh bill of health, so I do expect some change. I expect you'll see Rodrigo Muniz start this one, maybe in place of Jimenez. Might see another run out for Cuenca. And Harrison Reed is someone that hasn't played a lot of football recently, having that long-term injury, so it could be an opportunity to start him. But I feel like Fulham should give Wigan their due respect, give the competition the respect, and not overlook them. If they show the necessary commitment and work rate, along with the attitude and application, then you feel like they should have too much for Wigan on this occasion. And I feel like they will run out 3-1 victors and secure their passage into the 5th round of the FA Cup. That'll wrap it up for today's preview and a recap of all the events of the transfer window. Thank you once again for listening. I've been Gavin Ruffle, your host as always, and be sure to catch me next time on the Daily Fulham podcast.
Every club, every day. The Global Sports Podcast Network.